We finished the overhauls on several of your engines. We saw an opportunity to make some changes. What kinds of changes? These changes. What the? How do you all feel? I really am the big engine now. Does this overhaul make my bunker look big? I don't know how to feel. Relax, Percy. I feel great. He's been smiling since we finished. It kinda hurts now. How do you feel, Rosie? About the same. Can't complain. Nice new coat. Sir, how am I supposed to use the turntable? I was wondering the same thing. Ha! Thomas, I think I got smaller. Oh my. Hello everyone. It's been a while, but it's Train King James and I'm back again with another review. Here to discuss the new Thomas Wooden Railway line from 2022. Let's begin. So this new line, of course, didn't just come out of nowhere. It was developed through many interesting changes that happened to the wooden railway. The wooden railway, the original form that we knew and loved, ended in 2017 unexpectedly, despite the line's relative good performance in the market. In late 2017, early 2018, a new form of wooden railway was introduced. This was referred to as Thomas Wood. But the models were different. They were unpainted in large sections. Apparently, the choice was to show off that the models were in fact wooden to hit a new indie parent brand. Unfortunately, it did not go over well for parents or kids. Many thought the models looked cheap and unfinished and unprofessional, and the brand failed. However, in 2019, the models came back, this time in a painted variety. However, they still did not sell well in stores, and the line seemed to just fizzle off the shelves. It seemed like the Thomas Wooden Railway we knew and loved was dead. However, in 2021, new images of a new wooden railway line started to appear on the internet. Fans were concerned if these images were even real, if these were prototypes, or were these products that would never see the light of store shelves. After months of speculation, links appearing on sites like Amazon and then disappearing, it finally happened. In March 2022, this new wooden railway line was available for sale. I went to a store in April 2022, and I was able to pick up these models myself off the shelves. And here they are. And now let's get into just some initial thoughts on the brand itself, and then I'll be breaking down the characters as a whole. In terms of the brand itself, it's interesting. There's some key things that are found within all the models. We'll start with the big elephant in the room, the wheels. The wheels are a completely different design than we had seen on past wooden railway iterations. Here, the midsection is much thicker and wider, similar to the knob that was at the end of your typical wheels, but this time enlarged to look more like a wheel and less like a knob at the end of it. I like the attempt here, but I think it sticks out a little too far, and it gives the engines a bit of that monster truck wheel look. However, because this design is consistent on all the models, it's hard to necessarily berate each model for having it, as it is consistently shown. On note of the wheels, though, some characters get different sized wheels, and we'll get to that as we discuss each character. Another thing to notice are the faces. The faces are more expressive this time. They're different. Each face is more personalized to a character. Not every single character is smiling, as we saw on most wooden railway models of the past. Some characters are shocked. And this was an interesting choice. I do think sometimes the characters having a different face works, but I do miss a smiling face on characters like Gordon and Percy. More on that later. Sizing is something that's very different. as the range of size of models is changed once again, as now big engines have gotten bigger and smaller engines have gotten smaller. Another interesting design in all of the engines is that in their cabs, you can see the glow of the fire in all of the characters, which I think is a nice detail, something that's never really been done before on any Thomas item. With that stuff out of the way, let's break down each character. And we'll start with the number one engine, Thomas. Thomas is a tank engine. He has 6 small wheels, a short stumpy boiler, a short stumpy funnel, and a short stumpy dome. That's a good way to encapsulate this model. It's very boxy, but Thomas himself is a very boxy character. A design element that they kept over from the Thomas Wood line is having 3D arches on all of the models. And you can see Thomas's is just above his wheel. This is something the original Wooden Railway line would simply paint on. The Thomas Wood tried to implement this design, but I think it's implemented much better here. Thomas as a whole is a very stumpy looking engine, very different from his predecessor. However, I do kind of like the look Thomas has. It kind of reminds me more of what an E2 should look like in terms of being very big and stocky. However, I do think he is a little short in some areas. Because they made Thomas's boiler and tanks bigger, I do think his cab is smaller by comparison and less recognizable to the design that we saw in the show. Let's move on to Percy. Percy is also very interestingly designed. He's shorter than his predecessor, and this is something that the line did a lot of. They resized the characters to be more in line with the scaling that they had in the show, so the big engines are significantly bigger than the smaller engines, and Percy's the smallest model to be released so far. He still has 4 wheels. He's much closer to the size of original Lady or Scruff. Not quite that small, but still small nonetheless. He sports a shocked face here, and as I was saying before about the faces, I really do like having a different expression, but one thing I had hoped for this line is that characters would have different expressions, but they would also be changed amongst the different models. So there would be a model released of Percy smiling, but you can also get him in a shot variety too. I think it'd be a good way to diversify the models and incentivize collecting. However, with Percy's shocked face, I do think it's a fitting face for Percy to have. It's very accurate to the one that we've seen in the show. Percy has a nicely designed bunker, and something that I didn't mention with Thomas is that his bunker has 3D coal. This is something given to most of the tank engines, as 3D coal with a 3D bunker was something that was usually just painted on the original models, so the extra detail definitely helps the models. As a whole, Percy's chassis is also interestingly designed. It's not a simple box like years past. Now it's slanted on each end, which is also an interesting design element, something that Mattel really didn't have to do, but the extra detail does help the models look. Percy's details are nicely added on, he's got a great shape, and all in all is definitely one of the better designed engines of the line. Now we'll move on to Rosie. Rosie is very interesting. For the most part, she really didn't change from her previous models. Her paint job is that of what her Thomas Wood model had gotten, as she had gotten that change while Thomas Wood was in process. But other than that, Rosie is pretty similarly designed. She lacks 3D coal in the back, which is something interesting about her. She doesn't even have a painted spot for it. But as a whole, Rosie is still very nicely designed, she has a nice sweet face, and as a whole, she looks very nice. There's not really much to say about Rosie, as, again, she's pretty similar to what came before her. Now we move on to Diesel. Diesel is someone who is upgraded from his predecessor. He has more 3D decals and details that do make him come alive. His noticeable ladder, something that Diesel sports in the show but not many other Diesels do, is something that stands out on this model and makes him look more unique. He has an interesting expression that from different positions makes it look like he can either be smiling, or smirking, or plotting, but I do think it's a very nicely designed face. Some other exterior details are also defined. Diesel feels bigger than his previous model a little bit, but I think it fits him, especially the way he's designed in the show. As a whole, Diesel's design is very nicely executed. One thing I'd like to point out about Diesel's bottom is the name is painted vertically instead of horizontally, which is something that was done in the past. I'm not sure why this change was made, perhaps to save a little money somewhere, but I think with all the added extra detail, I think cutting corners in other areas kind of cheapens the look a bit, but it's not something I'm going to really gripe on. James is next, and James is a very interesting design. He's very oblong, a little awkwardly shaped, as he's much bigger than his previous models. Going from a medium-sized model to suddenly being as large as the original Gordon, it definitely takes some getting used to. I think part of the problem with James's model is his boiler. I think if his boiler were a tiny bit bigger, much closer to what it used to be on his model from 2002 till the end, I think James would look more normal. However, his boiler is smaller, more reminiscent of his model from the 90s, which I think does give him a bit of a weird look. He kind of reminds me of the original Henry from Wooden Railway that was made from 1992 to 2001, where Henry's boiler was significantly smaller than Gordon's, yet Henry's boiler should have been closer to the size of that of Gordon's. However, this doesn't kill my enjoyment of James's model. James's bright smile is enough to put a smile on any kid's face. His wheel arrangement is something I want to talk about, as James is the first model here displayed that has a different wheel arrangement than his previous model. Here, James sports his actual 260 look that his actual model does in the show, something that wasn't done before in Thomas Wooden Railway line. This was something attempted with Brio, but this is done, I think, in a way much better, and this is done by smaller wheels. They now give James a proper, smaller pony truck of sorts at the front, and then give him 6 driving wheels to go back behind him. All in all, James's tender is also interesting, as it only sports 4 wheels rather than 6. I think this was done to make his tender a little bit smaller than the ones we'll see in a minute, but I do think it does give his tender a weird look. His original tender did have 4 wheels as well. However, this was done with different sized wheels. James's tender wheels are smaller on this model than his original, and I think it gives a weird look in terms of his tender's design, even though it's identical to its predecessor. Let's move on to Gordon. Gordon is a big engine, and he's significantly bigger here than he was on his original model. And I love this decision. Gordon looks like a big, proud express engine. Not that he didn't before, but if their other characters are going to be scaled around, it makes sense to scale Gordon up. Here, Gordon gets a pony truck with 4 small wheels and 6 larger ones, which brings him a bit closer to what his basis was in the show, which has also an added pony truck at the back with 2 extra wheels. However, there wasn't room on this model for it, and I don't think it was a necessary addition to add the extra 2 wheels, as this gets the job done just fine. As a whole, Gordon's size really makes him an impressive model. An interesting choice of face here for Gordon is a bit of a concerned look, something we really don't see too much of him in the show. I would have preferred him either smiling or having a stern or angry face, something that we were more akin to Gordon having, but the concerned look is definitely unique enough as it is. Other than that, Gordon is very similar to his predecessor. His tender is larger, now the size of Thomas and sporting 6 wheels, something that only Flying Scotsman had on his models back in the day. The last engine we're going to look at is Hero. Hero is an interesting model, as he is also as large as Gordon, sports a tender that has 6 wheels, and he's also very nicely designed. My only gripe with Hero is I think his cab is a little small given the enlarged model. His original cab was also small on his Wooden Railway model, but I think making his cab a little bit bigger would have made more sense. There's not much really to say about Hero that I didn't say about Gordon, but as a whole, he's a really nicely designed character. Now let's move it to our next segment. So this part of the review, I'll be discussing, in my opinion, which is better, older Wooden Railway, which for most models will be represented by a Mattel model, with the exception of Rosie and Hero, who I do not own, to the new wooden railway. So we'll compare Thomas to his previous Mattel model. Which do I think is better? I give this one to the Mattel model. I think it's better proportioned. Thomas's cab feels about the right size and he feels less squished together. But I don't think the new one is particularly bad. I think as a whole, they're both very comparable and both are very well designed. Now we'll move on to Percy. This one I give to the new one. The sizing is a big plus for me, and I never really was a big fan of Mattel's Percy. I thought it felt very pudgy, and the face was very weird. This feels more natural, more like Percy, and I give the new wooden railway line major props for that. Next up is Rosie. And while I don't own a 2013 onwards Rosie, her original model from the 2000s and her 2013 Plus model are pretty similar in design. Just one has a CGI added face. So I won't be looking too much into those details. But as a whole, it's pretty even. But I'll give a slight edge to her older model. I think the other one is a little bit chunkier in certain spots, something that's very common with this line's design, but her actual original sizing feels a lot more natural to what we've seen of Rosie in the show. Though it's very, very close. Diesel gets my vote for the new one. The CGI Diesel I think is weird for having a simple smiling face, so Diesel having a bit of a smirk is cool. I also love the added 3D designs, and I think it shows more effort into this model than his original. James I give to the old one, and as much as I love James as a character, I do think this model is a little weirdly designed. I think with a bigger boiler he comes together, but as a whole, I really gotta give credit where credit is due on the original. Gordon I give to the new. I love his size, and I think Gordon being a bigger engine is really better represented here than his previous model. I love all the design features, his wheel configuration, and I think all in all it's a better model than what came before it. It's a great example of improving a model without doing too much to go too far in one direction. Hero, I also give credit to the new model. As a whole, for a lot of the same reasons I liked Gordon, Hero also gets high marks for his newer model. Now it's time for grades. Thomas, I give a 7 out of 10. I think his stocky look is definitely a little weird, but it's something that has grown on me, and it is one that I do like as a whole. It is one that's taken a little time to grow on me, but I do think it's a solid model as a whole. Percy's an 8 out of 10. I love the size he has, and I think he'd get higher marks if he had a smiley face rather than a shocked one. Rosie gets an 8 out of 10 as well. Rosie doesn't really have too many improvements over original, and I think as a whole she's a very solidly designed character. Really can't complain, but there's nothing here that really makes her a star. Diesel gets a 9, and he is the highest rated I have. I think his improvements were the smartest as a whole, and I think he really looks amazing with those 3D features. James gets the lowest grade of a 6. As much as I love James, I do have to agree that his sizing is a little weird and something that has been taking me some time to get over, but I do really like his model, but I don't like it as much as the others. Gordon gets an 8.5 out of 10. Very close to Diesel's ranking, but I think with a different face, Gordon may have gotten a perfect score. Hero gets an 8 out of 10. He scored very similarly to Gordon, but I think the smaller cab is something that does throw me off a little bit. As a whole, I really do like this new Wooden Railway line, and there are other characters to come out soon. If you like this video, and give it support, perhaps I'll make a second mega review of the next wave of characters to come. The pamphlet that came with these models shows off some really interesting designs that are soon to come in the new Wooden Railway line, and I'd love to share my thoughts with you guys, if you guys are interested in hearing them. All in all, this is a fun brand, and I think it's something that we should take some time to really appreciate. It's fun going back to stores and being able to buy Thomas stuff again. It's nice to say that while I may not be a fan of the current iteration of the show, at least there's something new about Thomas that I can really dig into. With that, this is Train King James signing off with another review. See you around, guys.